you enjoy soundtracks, that sort of symphonic element and absolutely unrelenting extreme metal, then chances are you'll really love this record. Hey guys, welcome back, and hello if you are new. So after the breakout album that was Pain Remains, all eyes are on Lorna Shore because they've got the very difficult task of following up such a massively critically acclaimed record in the form of I Feel the EVERBLACK Festering Within Me. So if you're not familiar with Lorna Shore, they are what I would probably imagine is one of the biggest deathcore bands on the planet right now. They had a real meteoric rise to popularity with their Pain Remains record, their EP, but you know, that's not to say that they haven't been a band for many, many years before that and struggling through. Now I would say they are very much in the same sort of pantheon as Whitechapel, Thy Art Is Murder, for example, and although they have ascended the ranks very quickly, this record, I think, matches the scope and ambition that this band really have. With that in mind, what struck me, I think, the most about this album is that it is even more cinematic than its predecessor. So if you're kind of familiar with that record, Pain Remains had sort of like this three-piece suite that ended the album, and it was a very sort of cinematic moment, felt very climactic. And to be totally honest, this record is kind of all of that all the time. War Machine is something that I was absolutely not expecting. You know, this song sounds like the beginning of a dystopian sci-fi film, essentially. But then you've got Prison of Flesh, which, you know, opens with those sort of Hans Zimmer-esque booms and that sort of weird oscillating frequency that gets sort of higher and higher and higher, building that tension. And both of these ideas, I think, really look at the idea of sound design and, you know, something that you would hear potentially in a movie. And then there's the track A Nameless Hymn, which personally for me dips its toe just as much in Behemoth territory as it does Dimmu Borgir territory. You know, this really is symphonic deathcore, which, you know, I think the band were kind of hinting at in the previous record, but more so it's like definitely in full HD on this. Equally though, I think the band's triumphant feeling to this sound is more prevalent than ever on this record. In Darkness, for example, has one of the biggest and kind of most soaring melodies, I think, on this record. And it also kind of stands toe-to-toe, I think, against Prison of Flesh, which is a really interesting song. But Forevermore, I think, very much kind of stands on its own. It's not quite as enormous as Pain Remains was, you know, after those sort of suites, but it still hits very, very hard. And it's a definitive statement, I think, especially with that sort of cello that kind of blends it out and you hear that sort of lapping of the waves. But I have to say, this record very much feels like it was written for the live environment. And after, you know, performing with Parkway Drive, performing at festivals, you know, very high up, I think they've kind of found their vice grip, which, you know, if you're not familiar, is a Parkway Drive song, and it was like their big sort of breakout song to move into arenas. And I think that's unbreakable. I think that song is really triumphant and speaks to that sort of anthemic quality, which is not something you would normally associate with deathcore. And whilst this record sounds bigger and kind of, I think, has broader scope, it really does kind of push the boundaries of where we think deathcore can go. You know, these are some massive places that they're about to play. And even the breakdowns, for example, incorporate strings now, which I thought was really, really cool. A Nameless Hymn kind of ratchets up that tension. Again, something similar that they do in, you know, horror soundtracks. I listen to loads of horror soundtracks, and it's very similar to that kind of sound design element, but it still remains something interesting, and it doesn't sound like, you know, one of my pet peeves with breakdowns is that it just kind of like derails the song completely. But this feels like it completes the song and it doesn't necessarily sound out of place. And whilst there are multiple set pieces here, I think it's the sort of deathcore November Rain moment of Glenwood with that massive guitar solo that I thought was really, really cool and totally a standout moment in the record. Equally though, you know, as much as there is this sort of bombast and cinematic element, there is a lot of intimate emotion, I think, on this record. You know, especially those sort of sounds that are at the end of Forevermore, which kind of has this sort of sound of waves lapping and this really quite forlorn cello that sort of, you know, brings the album to quite a poignant close. But I think particularly the themes that this record kind of touches on, you know, the idea of dementia in Prison of Flesh, blech, I can't even speak. And then Glenwood kind of talks about the estrangement between Will and his father. And it really kind of works to tug at the heartstrings a bit. And that, I think, was really what Pain Remains, that sort of Sweet's secret weapon was, is that it really made you feel something, even though it's basically being played at you like 3,000 BPM. On I Feel the Ever-Black Festering Within Me, Lorna Shore have put forward that sound that was on Pain Remains and put it into IMAX. Everything feels bigger, more intentional, more well thought out, and still I think they're doing something slightly different to not just their contemporaries, but themselves previously as well. It's a record that absolutely deserves to be played in grand halls, and I think will make them even bigger than they are now, which is really saying something. If you enjoy soundtracks, that sort of symphonic element and absolutely unrelenting extreme metal, then chances are you'll really love this record. Thank you so much for checking this video out. If you did enjoy it, please do hit that like and subscribe button, share with your friends, and comment underneath me. And I'll see you guys very, very soon for more album reviews, interviews, and all that stuff. Take care, my friends.